It's that time of year again, and I've prepared a delicious looking Christmassy project for you guys. As always, I'm giving you a reference photo, a drawing, and a list of materials, all of which are downloadable from my website. The link is in the description box below. When you go to checkout, use this code for 100% discount, making these absolutely free. So go ahead and grab those, and we'll jump in. Next, we'll take a closer look at our reference photo, and with watercolor illustration, we generally want to start with lightest to darks. So I'm going to start with the icing on the cupcake, and I'll start with mapping out the darkest, kind of more shaded areas here. So I'll start to mix up that color. By the way, to mix color, you'll see me use this wide flat brush, which is in the list of materials. And it's just easier to get into these pans than using the pointy brush. And if I use the pointy brush, it kind of damages that little point. So it's a lot easier to lift up the paint with this one. So to start with, I'm mixing burnt umber, a little bit of Payne's Gray, and yellow ochre. I have the reference photo right in front of me, and I'm constantly looking back at it and mapping out the areas that are the darkest in the icing. So wherever is the most shaded, I'm just going to kind of make a visual note of it, if you will. And you'll constantly see me tap my brush onto the little kitchen towel that I'm holding, which is an essential technique in order to be able to control the amount of moisture, the amount of water we have on the brush. And at this stage, it might not look like much is happening because I'm just glazing paint in very, very diluted light layers, but slowly but surely we'll build more color and make that paint more intense. And the one thing I want you guys to see is how there's a difference in this part of the icing. The color is very yellow, and here it becomes much more brown and sort of almost gray. So where it becomes like this, I'm just going to add a bit more Payne's Gray just to kind of gray it up a bit. This is a little bit more gray, and this is leaning towards more like golden yellows. So you just have to be more careful. Where it's more golden and yellow, we're going to add more yellow ochre, and leaning towards the browns and grays, Payne's Gray. And the one thing I want you guys to notice here is that even though the surface we're painting is very light, you can still tell the texture, that it's not even, it's not glossy, it's kind of like crumbly, and it's not very smooth. So you need to vary your brush marks to follow the form. What I mean by that is if it's a little bit crumbly, you can see it's kind of darker in some areas, lighter in others. You need to kind of go in with your stippling or brushing and just try and follow what you see. At this point, I feel like we can move on to other parts of the cupcake. The thing is, with lighter colors, it's hard to judge the hues properly without having other colors around it. So once we have the base of the cupcake painted as well as the cookie on top, we'll be able to see what colors are reflecting in the icing and add those hues on top. For the cupcake base, I'm mixing some raw sienna and burnt sienna with a little bit of burnt umber for the darker area. Testing it out on some scrap paper. And the key to achieving realism here is in mimicking the texture of the surface of the base of the cupcake, which is obviously bready and crumbly. The way I'm achieving it is simply by using stippling. So pay attention to where you can see the light hits the surface of the cupcake on the right hand side, and so our stippling is going to be fewer and far between to allow for that highlight, and the color is going to be much more intense on the left hand side where there's shadow. So we'll use the darker brown mix and the stipples are going to be more dense. This does take time. It's a labor of love, and don't we love it? So I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because I'm really aware of the length of the video, and I want to keep it manageable for you guys whilst also showing the technique. So I feel like once you've seen what I'm doing, you kind of, it's all a matter of practice. Because watercolor is a transparent medium, it really takes a few layers of it to get the color to the intensity that we need. Okay, now we can move on to the Christmas tree cookie decoration on top of the cupcake. And for my green mix, I'm going to combine Winsor green, a little bit of Winsor yellow, and a tiny amount of cadmium red. The icing on the Christmas tree biscuit is full of these little peaks and valleys. The valleys creating a darker color where the icing is cooling there, and the lighter colors obviously on the little peaks. Plus we have the sprinkles, which are casting a shadow, also creating the darker section. So I'm just going to go around the whole green area and map out the kind of the darkest and lightest areas as usual. Hopefully you'll see it build the texture of this icing. By the way, guys, my channel is very new, and every like and subscribe is deeply appreciated. Also, don't be shy, drop me a comment, find me on Instagram. Let's connect and support each other. I'm always on the lookout for good Christmas recipes. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys like to cook at Christmas? Hopefully you can see how I've tackled the icing of the Christmas tree biscuit. I do think that the green we have here is a lot cooler than what we see in our reference photo, so I will glaze over this with some yellow later. Next we can move on to painting the red sprinkles. To match the color of those, I'm mixing Indian yellow and cadmium red. And the challenge here is that they're super glossy, so we need to retain that very clear highlight. The key to that is to leave more of the paper, the white of the paper, than you think you need. And then we can cover over that later. We can always add more, but it's really difficult to take that away. So retaining that highlight here is going to be key. And wherever I see the shaded part of the tiny bobble, I'll add a little bit of Payne's Gray. Just a very thin glaze to add a little bit of darker red there, which is literally just a tiny bit of Payne's Gray. As you'll see me picking it up from my little plate there. For this star at the top, I'm going to be using the same set of colors that we've used for our cream icing, except perhaps I'll add a little bit more gamboge to the mix, and then I'll use that mix to glaze over the entire Christmas tree cookie, because I just think it needs to be a little bit warmer in tone than it is at the moment. Keep looking back at the reference photo to remind yourself where the highlights and the shadows are. That's the key to making your painting realistic. So I'm just going to quickly go around this biscuit and paint it yellow. I'm just using Winsor yellow here. I'll just finish off the biscuit and the star on top. You'll also see me add that yellow glaze over the green section of the green icing. The colors I'm using are a combination of Winsor yellow, gamboge, and raw sienna. And I'm paying attention to where the texture of the biscuit is lighter and darker. Where it's lighter, I'm just diluting my mix a little bit more with water. A watery mix looks lighter because the paper shows through from underneath it. And where the texture is slightly darker, I'm just going to go over that several times with a few glazes to intensify the color. And you can see how I'm not just going over the little Christmas tree with my pure yellow mix. I'm adding it in with my green mix we've prepared earlier for the icing. And I'm just warming it up all over. Okay, now we're going to move on to the final section of this project, painting the red paper case of our cupcake. And I know that once we've done that, we're going to have to go back up into the base of the cupcake and build some color there. You can see that this highlight is a little bit too pale, which, if you remember, we left deliberately to make sure we don't make it too dark too early. For my red mix, I'm going to combine cadmium red and ivory black with a touch of my favorite Payne's Gray. I don't think I've ever made a painting without using Payne's Gray. It's so versatile. And we start off with a very diluted mix of our red, very watery. We don't want to go too dark too soon because we need to pay close attention to where our highlights are positioned. This is where we need to really study our reference photo, and we know that the cupcake case is obviously made up of these little paper ruffles, and where they fold and the tip of the ruffle creates this highlight. The area between the ruffles is obviously darker, but it's not an even dark color. There are little variations in tone, and if we want to achieve realism, we really need to illustrate that. And this proved to be quite a challenge, actually. I think it looks a lot easier than it is, because not only do we have to pay attention to the lights and the darks and the highlights, but also kind of mimic the texture of the paper, because the folds themselves are not uniform. There's like little smaller, I'm not sure how to describe it, like at the bottom of the cupcake you can see some areas of paper are more crinkled than others. I hope I'm making sense. The brush marks I'm using are sort of like hatching. It's almost like I have a colored pencil and I'm sketching the shading in. I can later go over the hatching marks with a clean wet brush to soften them. This way I have a lot of control over where I apply the paint. It is quite a painstaking process and it takes quite a bit of time, but that's what it takes to achieve this level of realism with watercolor, or indeed with any other medium. Just softening the edge here with a clean wet brush. And the highlight on each individual little paper fold we're painting is brighter on the right hand side where the light is hitting the cupcake. So I'm going to leave them there for as long as possible so we can cover them over later when we're ready and we have most of the cupcake painted. And I think I'll speed up the rest here so you guys can see what I'm doing without this video being too long. Here I've painted the lightest sections of the cupcake first, and this is the darkest. So at this point things will look a little stark because all we have is an indication of the lightest and the darkest areas in this cupcake base. But don't worry, don't panic, just trust the process. We will gradually build the color up. The rest is more of the same process, so I think I'll probably set it to some nice Christmassy music for you guys. More hatching, more glazing, and retaining the highlights. All that's left to do now is to just go over the breaded part of the base of the cupcake, just to do a little bit more stippling and build some more color around the highlight. That's it from me, you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Stick around my channel and Happy Christmas!